Have you ever walked into your grandma's house and been overwhelmed by the aroma of fresh, homemade bread being baked in the oven? Well, if not, I hope someday you get to experience the sweet smell of bread being baked with love. My Grandma Betty has always had a passion for baking, but when it comes to baking bread, my grandma is the best. My grandma has a unique recipe that she uses for baking bread. This Swiss recipe is over 100 years old and came with my great-great-grandma from Switzerland to America. My grandma has had this recipe with her whole life, and it not only holds the instructions for delicious bread, but it holds history and memories. My family has always had a tradition of baking together on holidays such as Thanksgiving and Christmas, and my favorite part is always my grandma's bread. Now, I wasn't able to bring the actual recipe cards from my grandma with me today, but she was able to send me pictures, which we'll have to do. So, the name of this recipe is Mom's White Homemade Bread, which I know is not the most creative name in the world, but the taste more than makes up for it. So, for ingredients, it's important to lay everything out nice and neat, already measured before you get to baking. This helps to make sure that everything is organized and you can just easily mix things in without having too much trouble. So before I get into what the actual ingredients are, I should mention that this specific recipe does make 4 loaves of bread. So for our ingredients, we have 1 package of yeast, 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1/2 cup of lukewarm water, 4 cups of potato water, and yes, potato water is a thing, and it is the leftover water after you are done boiling potatoes. So it's important to make sure that you have this prepared beforehand. After that, you're going to need 1 tablespoon of lard, 4 teaspoons of salt, which is going to be 1 teaspoon per loaf, and then you're going to want to have a 5-pound bag of flour sitting there. Now we get to do the fun part, and that's the mixing. So first, you're going to want to mix your package of yeast, your teaspoon of sugar, and your 1/2 cup of lukewarm water together. And you're going to want to make sure you mix this thoroughly, and then after that, you're going to want to set it aside for the time being. After you have that set aside, you're going to want to take your 4 cups of potato water and mix in with the tablespoon of lard. After that's thoroughly mixed, you're going to take your 4 teaspoons of salt and mix that in there. Then you're going to combine your yeast mixture and your potato water mixture. Once that's combined, then you're going to add flour until the right thickness. And if you go to the other picture, yeah, there we go. I don't know if you can read it. It's a really old recipe card, but it says flour till the right thickness, and that's the really cool thing about this recipe is it says to add flour until the right thickness. And that brings me to the history of this recipe card is because it's over 100 years old, it was written at a time when everybody knew what the right thickness was because everybody made their own bread. So for those of you who do not know what the right thickness of bread is, let me enlighten you. The right thickness for bread dough is a smooth, doughy texture that's slightly sticky. So if you were to form it into a ball, it should be able to hold its own shape. So when you're adding the flour, you're going to want to keep on kneading it to make sure all the flour gets distributed evenly. And then after you have the right consistency, you're going to want to let the bread rise. And then another interesting thing about this recipe card is that there are no baking or temperature instructions or how long you're supposed to bake it for, which is very interesting because, again, it is over 100 years old, so everybody does know, back then, they did know how long to bake it for. It was just a common understanding. So with my family, what we usually do is bake the bread at 350 degrees for about an hour or until the bread is slightly brown on top. The really cool thing that I love about this recipe is that it has history and memories, so it was passed down from mother to daughter and to family. This is a cultural artifact for me because it is part of my Swiss roots. It has history and memories throughout my whole family, and I get to take part of that, and I'm thankful and grateful and blessed to be a part of the memories of mixing, baking, and of course the best part, eating them.